Welcome to Intersections. It's 10:30 Thursday, Pacific Standard Time, so this must be Intersections. My name is John Kao, and we are coming to you in a special format today. Brian is taking the week off, and we have a special double session with Kenny Werner, jazz talent extraordinaire, who's done a great deal to make a bridge between the worlds of jazz and the world of everything else, as you will discover shortly. But let me first introduce the show. Intersections is our weekly jam session that mashes up technology, culture, design, and innovation. We have a global audience. We're so pleased to be able to bring you distinguished guests from many different fields, innovators all in their own right. We have, at this juncture, close to 100 interviews in intersectionslive.com, our archive. So please feel free to go and check those out. They're evergreen interviews that have not lost any of their impact with the passage of time. And actually, we're not talking about the passage of that much time. So there you go. So I'm John Kao. I have a long and varied career in the innovation area, recovering academic, a former film and Broadway theater producer, serial high-tech entrepreneur, self-styled thought leader in the area of innovation, former Harvard Business School professor, former faculty member at the MIT, visiting faculty member at the MIT Media Lab and Stanford, among other places. And my co-host, Brian Solis, is the global chief evangelist for Salesforce, who's made a career out of linking digital, before digital was really a discernible object of consideration, to such areas as social media, marketing, innovation, organizational transformation, leadership, and much more. So with that as an introduction to the show, let me turn our attention now to giving you a sense of our guest, Kenny Werner. Kenny Werner is actually one of the most storied jazz pianists out there working today. His discography, as they call it, would be longer than my arm. He's currently on the faculty at the Berklee School of Music, which is not UC Berkeley, but Berkeley, Berklee, named after Lee Berk, who founded it. Berkeley is known as a leading, if not the leading, school for popular music, jazz, and other ways for people to actually put music into the world and make a living from it. Pat Metheny and Keith Jarrett and luminaries beyond description have all been students at Berkeley. And interestingly enough, Kenny currently teaches a course based on his seminal and original book, Effortless Mastery. You can see it here, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary. As a matter of fact, Kenny and I started writing about jazz from somewhat different yet complementary perspectives right around the same time. Jamming came out in 1996. So just about 25 years as well. And Effortless Mastery was, I think, an extremely influential book. Maybe Kenny had not foreseen its impact, but first of all, its impact extended far beyond musicians to really all of us who are trying to practice a craft. And he wove together many themes from meditation practice and from the whole notion of what it means to have a practice and to learn a proficiency like jazz improvisation. And he came to some startling conclusions, one of which was that by inhabiting a mindful space with exercises that he calls the 4 steps, musicians were able to dramatically improve their comfort level with improvisation and their creativity without even intending to do so. In fact, Kenny says repeatedly that wanting to do well or wanting to play well or wanting to impress other people or impress yourself, in other words, the ego is the surest way to play badly and to create obstacles between yourself and your desired outcome. And I'm sure if we all reflect on our own experience, there are times when we feel like we're in the zone, or what psychologists call in a flow state. And I think the notion of the space, as Kenny has defined it, even goes beyond that to the kind of place where Zen practitioners and meditation practitioners, practitioners of mindfulness, know how to inhabit a place that's beyond thinking and beyond the self and beyond ego, to be able to become a clear conduit for the abundant inner creativity that we all have to begin to emerge. So endless mastery became a big deal, and not just with jazz musicians, but with classical musicians and with non-musicians as well. And so one of the reasons for having Kenny on the show today is because he's just come out with a new book called Becoming the Instrument. And in fact, this is it's not quite out yet. It's this is called an exclusive advanced copy, which I just received a couple of days ago. So I really don't have an ability to comment about it too much, except to say that we are all an instrument of creative expression. And becoming the instrument or becoming intimate with it is about being able to inhabit what Kenny calls the space and to be able to then create. So, you know, if intersections is about innovation and creativity is really the pointy end of the spear for innovation, because you have to come up with something that's new and authentic, then what Kenny has to talk about is relevant for all of us. And his notions of the clarity and simplicity of finding the space and being able to acquire proficiencies in a very methodical way, and to be able to take the ego and expectations out of the whole process has lessons for all of us. So what we're going to do here is actually now screen the rest of the show in the form of an interview that I did with Kenny last week. Part of being a busy teacher is that he has a class on what he calls random harmony, which conflicts with this particular time slot. Random harmony, just for your information, since it's a pretty pungent term, is a set of techniques by which pianists, actually all musicians, are able to improvise freely from one harmonic structure to another, almost without any kind of conscious, premeditated thinking. And I'll leave it to him to explain it in the video, among other things. So please enjoy this interview with Kenny Werner, which I am now going to tee up for your edification. What would be really interesting, I think, is to give our audience a sense of your journey. Well, let's see. And again, you know, your journey could probably take up several 1 hour slots, but really your journey around the issues that crop up in effortless mastery. And of course, we'll want to talk. Page unresponsive. Wait. Exit page. Okay, we're having some technical difficulties here, but hang on just a What would be really interesting, I think, is to give our audience a sense of your journey. And again, you know, your journey could probably take up several 1 hour slots, but really your journey around the issues that crop up in effortless mastery. And of course, we'll want to talk about your new book and your experiments and your initiatives to date in terms of bringing jazz to a broader audience, not just in terms of a listening audience, but a practitioner audience that's hungry for input about creativity and how it works. So, yeah, let us know a little bit about what that journey has been like for you, and then we can jump into some of the specifics.
Well, probably the most relevant part of my journey is how I ended up here, how I ended up doing exactly what I'm doing. I am a musician uh, of the ilk where what I do is what musicians do. I mean, I perform, I play, I compose, I was doing whatever he was doing. The fact that I teach is not unusual because once the music really quieted down more and more from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s, people ran for the hills trying to find a teaching job as soon as possible. And they could continue their art through teaching, which also gave them certain benefits that they could sort of work the system that they of the school they taught for and actually create creative situations. It was great. And today everybody really assumes, no matter what they're doing, that somehow they'll need the component of teaching in order to fill it in. So the fact that I teach is not very unusual. But what I started to do as soon as I did teach is what brought me to this moment. I noticed different things than everybody was noticing. So, for example, the first time I taught, I mean, when I gave a few private lessons, I never really listened to the person. I was watching them. And then I would notice, oh, right there, you were trying to play right, or right there, you were trying to play better. And this is, over 30 years ago. And someone said, no one even talked about that and said, how did you know that exactly at that moment? And there was a kind of a ESP about it. It wasn't always so obvious, like the shoulder going up or the face wincing. It could have just been a feeling that what they were doing at that moment was terribly important to them. But simultaneously, I had to point out that that was the exact moment that they stumbled when something was very important to them. So nobody was commenting on this. If anybody was working on it in psychology, it wasn't yet even connected to the arts. There might have been a few books like Zen and the Art of Archery, but very little that discuss the phenomenon of what puts me in my highest state of performance. Among things is one of the most important is detachment, because everybody can report when they were attached to their performance, they had trouble getting it going. And for whatever reason, if they convince themselves that it wasn't that important, they always say they played better. So I just started to reflect more and more of that phenomenon. And then I got a call to teach at one of the things that really developed my rap. I got a call from Arnie Lawrence from the New School. It had just started as far as the jazz. Arnie Lawrence was a great alto player. He played in Dizzy's band and a lot of things, but he convinced the New School to start a jazz school. And it was a very loose school at that point. All the teachers were great players. Walter Davis, Jackie Bayard, Joe Chambers,
Wow.
Bernard Purdy. I don't think there were any teachers there, but they were all great players, some of which who taught. So Larry Willis was also a great piano player teaching, and one day he didn't make it there. And Arnie said, why don't you come in and sub for Larry Willis for this class? And I said, I'm not really into doing classes, I'm not really into teaching. And he said, it pays $150. I said, what time? So I show up and they're doing a midterm. I'm thinking, oh, this is great. All I have to do is sit here like a homeroom teacher. They'll finish their midterm. They'll hand their papers in. And in those days, the school was so new, they had no accounting system. You went up to the office and they cut you a check, just like that. So I'm sitting there, everybody hands their papers in. And I think in that class, you had a few luminaries. Larry Goldings, great pianist and organist. Peter Bernstein, great guitarist. Brad Meldau was a year later, but he was in my class too. But so they handed the papers in, and Arnie says, no, everybody go back, sit down. He was a real New Yorker kind of guy. He said, Kenny, show him some of your shit. I said, well, Arnie, being the kind of student I was, if I had just taken a test, I'd want to get out of here. I wouldn't be interested in anything. I took my test. I want to get out of here. Said, no, just show him some shit. So I look at the test, and the first question is, what is the first chord of body and soul? So I don't even know where I'm going yet. So it was an early version of what I'm doing this very moment. I said, what is the first chord of body and soul? Someone said, E flat minor. I said, wrong. They went, what? What kind of shit is this? So they said A flat sus, which can be a substitute for that. I said, wrong. A couple more tries. Now these kids of the 80s was a very judgmental time in jazz. That's when Wynton Marsalis brought the whole thing back about what is jazz and what isn't jazz. Believe me, from the 70s back, nobody asked that question. But I come to believe in the wisdom of time and cycles that it was important. But at the time, I thought, why is a young guy playing like Jackie McLean? I never heard of this, So anyway, so after a few times, they're yelling at me. They're going like, "Hey man, what kind of jive shit is this?" And like, they're getting pissed, and I still don't know where I'm going, but I'm really enjoying their reaction. So then I finally said, "Okay, you want to know? Any chord is the first chord of body and soul."
Mhm.
So they went, "Oh, that's that '70s crap," like,
Mhm.
those freer musicians that are jive. I said, "Well, let's test it. Give me a name of a chord." So they said B7. I went B7. I went down to B flat, managed to get to E flat, which got me to A flat sus, to the second chord. They said, whatever they said, I got back within a bar or two and accidentally gave them the best harmony lesson they will ever have. So Arnie said, "Man, you got to teach here. So they started calling me the sub. And I was there almost every day because they were all great jazz musicians. And in the tradition, at least one of them wasn't showing up every day.
Mhm.
So I taught everybody's class. And that at the end of the week, I went up to the office and they cut a check for $1,200 because I subbed for about 8 classes. I mean, it was amazing. But in this time, I started to improvise as a orator. Now, if you ask Larry Goldings or Peter Bernstein, any of those guys who are going, they will tell you the parts of my book, they saw me acting them out in those early classes.
Mm.
So from there, I did the seminal moment was I did a thing at the IAJE. This was a now defunct organization, International Jazz Educators.
Mm.
And you could either play a set or you could do a masterclass. So I happened to be doing a masterclass and I started to say everything. And the first thing I said was, wow, this is like as exciting and as unimportant as a Star Trek convention. And everybody like laughed and cheered. And I went on for about 50 minutes. Jamie Abersol, one of the original pioneers in jazz materials, play alongs and how to books, was videoing me. So when he got done, he sent the video around to educators all around the country. And I started to get invitations to speak, which is weird. All I ever was a player or a composer. So I go to this school in California and there was no internet yet, or not that we all used. And I'm passing the band leader's door and there's a quote by me. And so I'm still trying to figure this out. I was like, what's going on? And now to shorten it, over the years, I kept adding and adding to that body of information. And I found myself liberating a lot of musicians and not just jazz musicians, any kind of musician, by something I knew, but I didn't know that they didn't know it. The first thing being that it's not as important as everybody's making it out to be. That's a great help if you want to play the music. So after a while, they became lectures, they became workshops. I went to Europe and I did 5 days of really just talking and doing a few examples, showing them stuff that eventually became the steps. And meanwhile, my reputation as a player was also growing. And finally, by 95, I had several people following me around with tape recorders. And I thought to myself, one of these guys is going to write a book. For once in my life, I should capitalize on something that's coming out of me. I should write a book. And I recorded a 3-day workshop with the Danish Musicians Union in a beautiful place. And then I just transcribed it. That was the beginning of writing a book and using a computer, by the way. I'd never used a computer. And then I kind of put it into chapters, depending on what I was talking about. From the time I wrote the book and put it out, it was an unexpected, we knew it would be, Abersol put it out because he
This is
believed,
endless mastery.
yeah,
The,
effortless
yeah,
mastery.
yeah.
I knew
Effortless
people
mastery.
would read it because the subject was so hot when I talked about it, but I had no idea that it would go around the world as something. I mean, I never knew what circles that book would enter. It's almost like the cliche of some spirit wanted to write that book and they wrote it through me. I'd find out it was required reading in a seminary school. I'd find out it was in an actor school.
Mhm.
And so I realized it had its own journey. I was involved, and it's been a very big boon to me ever since. It's also increased the fascination with me because at a certain time, John, when you're playing, you always will hope to be reviewed. So
Mm.
one of the other things I never felt about jazz is that you had to sound the same all the time. Now, you may not think that's what everybody thinks, but if you listen to Sonny Stitt, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, everybody, Herbie, they all pretty much, every record was a different tune, but the same sound. And I wanted to do something more like a director. I might do an urban comedy, then I'm going to do a Western, then I'm going to do Gladiator, then I'm going to do, Panic in Needle Park. Every environment for my music would have been totally different. And so the first record company I recorded for, Enja, they said, man, I went to Europe, I got a solo piano record, and I played in the main jazz club in Europe, in Munich, for a week. And every day, one day I brought in toys, another day I did this and that, and it wasn't being done. And the producer, he said, you're going to have a hard time. I said, why? He says, well, you do something different every time. I said, I would think that would be
A
a
plus.
plus.
Yeah.
It wasn't. And it wasn't in the reviewing thing either. Because if I did a record that sounded subtly like Bill Evans, but also much more psychedelic in a way, it could be the arrangement of bars or the chords that like turn back on themselves, like, in a weird way. But the tenor of it might have been like a Bill Evans trio. So they got the guy to review that, and they thought that's who I was. The next record, I have cats scratching on the blackboard. The same guy reviewed me, and he said, it's horrible. They don't put a different reviewer on every time that somebody tracks you. But this is what I'm going to finish this story with. From the day that book came out, I never had that problem anymore. It was always my own category. It's the guy that wrote that book. So we don't know what to expect from him. They would pay more attention to my philosophy than which way I chose to play. And it was a great boon in every way. It actually also, the gift of teaching it, I'm sure you could say the same thing, informed my own playing to a much higher level, because there's nothing so strong as giving it away. I guess
So
that's
it sounds like what you were discovering, like with that body and soul anecdote, was a level of music that and experiencing music that was totally different from learning theory or building technique. And actually, it might be interesting for the audience to hear that illustration, right? Because you had the conventional, or your students had that conventional notion of how body and soul starts out, but your meta level
my
point was
students
that.
had
Hmm?
that conventional notion.
Yeah,
They don't
yeah,
anymore.
exactly. Your meta level point was that you can start from anywhere, and that freeing yourself from structure and freeing yourself from judgment, and
Should we
freeing
do it?
yourself. Hmm?
Should we do
Sorry.
it?
Yeah, let's
So
hear
pick a
hear.
chord.
Oh,
It has nothing to do with body and soul.
oh, F minor seven. Uh, A Phrygian. That was probably a softball. So how about F minor seven flat five?
Oh, that is hard. What you have to do, since that note absolutely doesn't belong in that chord, you do that with the next chord too. Then they both be perceived as correct.
And so, what's the learning there? I mean, this sounds like it was
Learning
kind
is
of a.
music is easier than you think.
Well, what is it about music that we, you know, have a tendency to make it so hard? What gets in the way?
Ego, our desire to play it well. That's what the whole thing has evolved to in terms of what I teach. My desire to, all you have to do is ask in the first class, whenever you really think it's important to play well, how do you play? And most people say they had trouble finding it. And when you don't care, how do you play? And most people say they play better. So therefore, it's pretty quick, the answer. Needing to play better makes it more complicated. Thinking about a whole theory book makes it hard to absorb the first page. Actually, some of it I learned from being an incredibly bad student. And then when I solved my own problem, it turned out to be a problem a lot of people had.
So, isn't that a bit of a statement about the current state of music education? Because music
No,
education.
it's about the permanent state of music education.
Uh-huh.
Always been. It's just that they kept adding more stuff to study, which only exacerbates the problem.
Right. So you have, the Royal Conservatory of Music, gradated study curriculum for piano. You have competitions. You have, I mean, it seems to me that the whole purpose of music education is, you may start out with the idea that everyone should have an experience in music, but the pyramid is so flat that by the time you get higher up, there are just the few people that want to go on to a conservatory or so forth and so on, and that a lot of what passes for music education is, number one, about getting people to not like music, but number two, to miss out on all of these wonderful lessons that can be learned from music that have nothing to do with the traditional practice theory or routines that are captured in effortless mastery and, in other areas of saying, well, jazz is more than jazz, music is more than music.
Well, it has really comes down on one particular point. Uh, you say the Royal Conservatory, and someone will say Jacob Collier. He went to the Royal Conservatory. I think he did. But whether or not your impression of the Royal Conservatory is where they create Jacob Colliers.
Hmm.
You know who Jacob Collier is?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Or Keith Jarrett went to Berkeley. The problem is that the speed, it's all about the speed with which they dole out the information. It's designed to fail. So a very blatant example would be, let's say in jazz, if you don't play the altered scale on a 5 chord, you sound like an amateur. If you can morph into the altered scale on a 5 chord, like if you play like this, you just play G minor through the whole thing, you're
Right.
perceived rightly as pretty much a beginner. If you do this, so if I was showing the altered scale, I wouldn't want to abandon it until that person had digested it. So that without having to think particularly, it would start to express itself on the 5 chord. Then it would be good to move on. Now, a school, any school with accreditation, is structurally set up to fail that. You might study the altered scale for 2 weeks, or you might even spend a semester on it, but it's not worth spending the time on it unless you're able to spend enough time to own it. So what people learn semester after semester is to be exposed to stuff, but not to own anything. This messes up with their confidence that they had before they went to school. We're not talking about that top 5% or the top 10 people that came out of school. We're talking about all the rest who get more and more confused and less confident in their talent. A teacher shows them something and then they're on to something else. And even though they understood it and they got a good grade on their test, music is not like the law. You could study a million things and you can always go back to that wall of books and look something up. Once they count it off, the only things that come out are the things that you own, not things that you're working on. And in fact, it has a double negative because not only does it take away your patience for studying it, but you ruin what you're able to do looking for things that are not yet ready to play.
You
So it
once
has a
told me,
negative effect on
yeah,
your playing and it has a negative effect on your practice. And it's both ego. That's the point.
right. You once told me that there was a difference, between a bowl that was wide and flat in terms of how you filled it up with a certain amount of water versus a deep and narrow container, and that the tendency is to the ego wants to be greedy and learn a lot of stuff and move quickly and scan many things, and as you say, owning it step by step, brick by brick, creates the
Owning it
inevitable.
changes your playing.
Right.
Being acquainted with it does nothing to change your playing. And that starts to make you suspicious, but not of the system. It makes you go like, what's wrong with me?
Yeah.
And that happens to, I would hate to know the percentage of students that go that way instead of the few success stories. And then there's that ugly little thing about, and I once almost didn't get the job at Berkeley because someone had me on tape saying this, but it's not Berkeley, it's everywhere. Uh, you accept people that can already play. And then maybe school does nothing to hurt them. And then they come out and they say, look, he studied with us. So I'm not saying you can't negotiate and make school an amazing experience, but not for the majority of people. Majority of people, the silent majority has to be perplexed and then just get out of school and see if they can find themselves again. And
Well,
effortless mastery
mm,
is specifically, and I give Berkeley credit for this. They know this is happening, but it's not just happening at Berkeley. It's the style and form and even legality of Western education. Because if you don't, if you send your kid to school, just like when they were little kids, they want a gold star in that first Little Fingers book. If you're going to send your kid to school and spend all that money, you want them to get a degree. In order for it to be a degree, it has to be accredited. And once it's accredited, the attention is on quantity, not quality.
well, I can relate to this from the perspective of teaching in a well-known Eastern business school, which is that giving people conceptual knowledge, even using case method approaches, which are about analyzing specific situations as opposed to reading about the theory of marketing or finance or whatnot, doesn't really allow for the generation of the kind of proficiencies that come from practice and that come from the personal side of practice. In other words, I am the instrument of starting a company. I am the instrument of creating collaboration. I am the instrument of orchestrating a process where people will think about the strategy of something that's complicated, and so it all mostly happens in the head as opposed to the heart or in the body or in some different source of rhythm or meaning, and therefore you get a lot of people running around living in the world of concepts, but not actually able to do, for example, the intimate work of being an innovator or an entrepreneur. So I wonder, you've
It's just
been
one little
thinking a lot.
slight difference. I'm sorry, John. The only difference between music and all those things is that that person can spend the first 5 to 10 years of their career building that personal experience. The problem is if you don't already own something in the music coming out of the chute, you can't play it. So that has an immediate and permanent impact on your future. If you come out and you go to Greece and they don't speak English and you say Stella by Starlight and you don't play intelligently on the 5 chord, you'll never see them again.
Right.
Whereas I agree, what you're talking about is kind of very much the coalition, and that still happens to the musician too. But since it's real time, that's what separates music even from the art world, from painting or, it has to be done in real time and it can't be changed. The closest thing to other things is composing, because what you write, you can change. But the improviser is really much more without a net than every other kind of thing. It's true, the overkill and overwhelming of information, none of which they can really access in real time, but in most other situations they don't have to. That's the only difference, but the analogy
Yeah.
is good, but that.
Yeah. No. No. I get that. I think that uh, the equivalent in an MBA course is that you learn. Well, the problem is what you described, which is that you do 900 case studies. You are frantically trying to ingest information and make inferences and so forth and so on, and you come out with a kind of a pastiche of understanding. You do come out with the ability to apply certain fundamentals like financial analysis or the frameworks of strategy, and then the world of practice is, or the world of professional practice is really about enabling you to take those rudiments and be able to, if especially if you're in the world of starting companies or being a innovator in an established organization, to be able to recombine the elements and essentially to begin to improvise. So I'm really curious to know how you've been thinking about the applicability of what you've been teaching and what you've been learning to, let's say, the world of business or to leaders that know nothing about music. They may listen to music or appreciate it, and how that also relates to your newest book that is about, well, by the time this interview airs, it will have been out. It's coming out in mid-October. But let's shift gears and kind of look a little bit at that bridge between jazz and the rest of the world.
Let me just make that one distinction because I know for your language, jazz is the metaphor by which the businessman can become more improvisational, more access more on the spot information. But I don't believe it's jazz. uh, Jazz in the hands of somebody that suffers from the fear of failing, that or that has not learned their lessons deeply enough, that is not the jazz. So it's not really jazz, it's mastery. The same thing can happen playing a minuet. If you There's a couple of things. I think we have to look deeper at what the thing is I teach in order to then
Yeah,
bring relevancy.
let's do
So
it.
when you said I am the instrument of starting this company, I'm the instrument. What does it mean to not be the instrument? That means that you are, in my book, I talk about something called the space, which you now well know about. And so from the conscious mind, there's all these considerations and concerns. From the space, there's only that moment. So from the conscious mind, there is fear and perhaps overthinking about making decisions. Now we've crossed over to a potential business model, right? From the space, the success is making a decision, not how it turns out. So we can certainly say a person that considers the taking of actions to be a success is liable, just percentage wise, to bump into more good decisions than someone that would not take decisions, because from their conscious mind, i.e., their ego, if it didn't turn out, that would be a failure. So when you're improvising, John, and the way I found it originally was music, you will find many people inhibited. Playing jazz doesn't make you uninhibited, as you probably know. For example, Brazilian music is not happy music. People are happy. And so when a person's playing Brazilian music and concerned with how good they're playing it, and also are only quasi prepared to play it, that's not the fact that it's Brazilian music doesn't furnish anything. So once it was asked to me, what do you think in the 20th century? What do you think is the evolution of music in the 21st century? I said it's completely unimportant. The question is what is the evolution of the musician into the 21st century? Because what creates the sound is a mindset. And instead of working on how you want to sound, if you work on the mindset and even train from that mindset, it will make all the difference in the world. And play, or for example, studying and playing are two different things. People sabotage themselves by not studying something deep enough or having too many things to study in context and then trying to apply them when they're not ready to apply. Whereas playing, there's only one job: to love and honor what's coming out, not to subject it to the old model, old paradigm of it's good or it's bad. Because if it's good, it could be bad. And if it is good, you would worry it could be bad. And that way, it's like a bad acid trip. Until you've considered one, you'd never have one. Until you consider that you could have a bad acid trip, and you go, wow, what if this is the one? The thing is to evolve beyond good and bad performances. Good and bad music, in the objective sense, is if you like it, it's good. That's what Louis Armstrong said.
Right.
If you don't like it, it's bad. And there's nothing more to it. It's not important enough to debate. Okay. But good music or bad music as being a standard you're trying to keep, I would argue in well over 70% of people's cases, not the ones we listen to, because they don't have that problem. That's why we're listening to them. But in most people's cases, the idea of good, bad, am I good? Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Feeds into their actual sense of self-worth, which is even more illogical because it's only music. So I like to say this, which flies right in the face of that thought. I would never value myself as a human by something as insignificant as how I play a musical instrument. That's like valuing myself as, how I play ping pong. And the problem is this: the more you value yourself by how good you play, the harder it is to play because of the original question. So transposing this to the business thing, you would train your mind to make decisions, not so oppressed by the need for them to work out. And as we find out in music, whenever you're making decisions, what notes am I going to play, but you're not evaluating them at the same time, they tend to work out. So for a business person to practice that principle of self-supporting ability to make decisions on the spot based not on the tyranny of whether they work out or not, but based on the mere fact of the state of mind from which I made them, how could they not trend towards tremendously successful actions? And they do. In that sense, they bring out the intelligence of someone. And in that very same, the opposite of that is that worrying about what people think about you makes you less interesting in a group, right? Okay, worrying about whether your team respects you makes you weaker. So the more you have a self-respect from within, and that way, it's very much Kashmir Shaivism. I'm reminded of it's very spiritual. It's all one thing now. That's what I see. It's no this and that. It's all this. Am I the full manifestation of the human I can be at this moment, or am I hedging my bets about the future, which might even be later today? And I would argue that people that are doing that are their own filter from their most brilliant moves or
Well, the
sound.
issue comes up in business, though, because you have organizations, and organizations have expectations and norms and rules, and expectations often want to stamp out uncertainty and ambiguity, and they want
Right.
you to have the right
At the same
answers, and
time,
then
don't you find they're more curious today about this than they've ever been?
oh, definitely. I mean, this is people have called this the age of innovation. It's the age,
Right.
yeah. The whole idea that we are in an era of disruption requires new answers, and I would say it's beyond disruption to discontinuity, because it's like sailing out into the ocean with maps that end in the middle of the deepest part of the ocean and having to invent a new map at the same time. So, the notion of it's partly why. Design thinking is in such vogue these days, because design thinking it's many things, but it's also a Trojan horse for thinking for acknowledging the importance of creativity. And the design thinkers have a maxim, which is defer judgment.
Well, that's a
Fail
sort of
often.
polite form of what I'm talking about.
Yeah,
But let me just interfere for 1 second,
yeah,
because I'm going to
absolutely.
bring a pragmatism in it that isn't the normal philosophy. When you say, but they have structures and boards to answer to, and however you want to say it, that is like saying that stuff you're saying is great, but it's the stuff of dreamers. How he could never exist in my company and do that, which is very reasonable. So here's the pragmatic side of it. I am not suggesting that anyone go out in a place of constant. In other words, if I'm showing you effortless mastery, if you may have noticed, I said, do not try to apply it anywhere. The thing that's missing is that you can reprogram the mind to work towards that, but you have to have a safe environment to work it. If I tell you, for example, yes, loving yourself at the very moment of mistakes will expand your creativity and innovation. But you might say, yeah, but I don't get too many mistakes in my business. You get 3 strikes and you're out, or 1 strike and you're out.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that. What I'm suggesting is a series of exercises that exercise comfort and self-love with complete failure, so that you wipe it out of the programming. And then you go back to your job and you are respectful of all the barriers that exist there. I am not suggesting that people go into the workplace and try a risky theory. I suggest that they try it in a safe environment to change the polarity of their mind, go back, respect the form. Let me give you a musical example. The most creative you could be is to move your hands over the keyboard, and no matter what you hear, say, and I would do this with non-pianists. That's the most beautiful sound I've ever heard. All the things their mind's telling me, I'm not a piano player, this is bullshit, blah, blah, blah. But that's one part of your brain. You're going into the space where, if you just thought of it as sound, of course it's much more interesting than going outside and hearing a car horn and tires screech and a couple of birds. And, but we are brainwashed because of this chain of good, bad music, or good, bad, right? So you do this, right? And you do it, and you're going to be doing it, by the way, when we do the second step.
Yeah,
Then you
been
say,
doing
well,
it.
I can't do that
Hmm.
and go play a gig where they're playing Stella by Starlight.
Right.
However, so you forget all about that and you just go to play Stella by Starlight. But because of this reprogramming, you notice you're finding naturally, without even looking, more creative ways of going through the same form. So I guess what I'm saying is, and what my teaching would be in the business world, is to practice formlessness fearlessly in an environment that's safe from anything to be fearful of. And then we ask ourselves, did it change my chemistry when I just did what I usually do? I went to the board meeting and I had no desire to bring effortless mastery in there. But what changed in my polarity from doing it unrestrained? So it is a programming of the mind, nothing to affect in the outer world.
Well, there you have it. And I think you can see that I'm fond of saying that jazz is more than jazz, especially given its relevance to all of the things that Kenny covered in his discussion about creativity and about practice and professionalism. Um, Making a bridge between the world of jazz and other kind of creative arts and the mainstream of business is a task unto itself. And 25 years ago, I think there were a few lonely voices in the wilderness. Now it's a little bit more of a recognized phenomenon. So I hope this excursion into Kenny Werner's world of effortless mastery and becoming the instrument has been of some interest to you. He certainly is a colorful and major figure in jazz, and hopefully now in building leadership and management capabilities. I can imagine a Kenny Werner boot camp at some point. So with that, I'll wish you well. Next week, we are planning to have Tim Brown, the chairman of IDEO, who's been with IDEO, since 1987 and very influential in the whole design thinking world. So that will be a special event that you won't want to miss. And with that, have a great week, and we will see you when we see you.